Hi and welcome to another gaming video, and today's video, there's more than one element to this video. I was going to start this off with just a review of Kirby Mass Attack, a fantastic game that I've started playing, and then it sprawled into what does it play like on different DS systems. I was trying to compare them, partly because I'm looking at buying a new 3DS and I couldn't decide whether I wanted a new 3DS or a new 3DS XL. I couldn't decide whether I wanted to go for the regular size screens or if I really needed the big screens. I started playing Kirby Mass Attack about a fortnight ago and I'm absolutely hooked, and it's a bit odd because it's not my usual style of game. It is a touch based game only, so you don't use any of the controls. It's a cutesy sort of platformer. That's not my style of game normally, but I popped it in, had a play and was instantly hooked. I don't get much time to play games, but I suddenly found myself 4 hours later still playing it. It is a Kirby game. Everything is done by the stylus, which is great for a DS game. It takes full advantage of the whole DS touch capabilities. The premise of the game is there's multiple levels, multiple worlds, and you have to guide Kirby through each one of them, killing whatever enemies come along and solving some simple puzzles. It's not the most complicated game, but it's really, really enjoyable. You play the game and you control Kirby using the stylus, so you just touch where you want to be and he will walk there. If you tap on an enemy, he'll jump on them and kill them. And you can also drag Kirby and make him fly into certain sections of the level. That is the basic premise of it. There is no button control, it is all done via touch. But there's a twist to it. It's called Mass Attack, and you control more than one Kirby at a time, and you can control up to 10. Some of the levels require you to have a certain amount of Kirby's to start it, so if a level says that you need 7 and you've only got 6, you need to go back and do another level to try and get an extra Kirby, and that's done by collecting sort of fruits throughout each level. Once you get to 100 fruits, I think it is, then the next Kirby appears. And controlling them, you control them all at once, so if you've got 10 of them, you just tap once and they'll all bounce to where they can be. Sometimes you get a little bit stuck where sort of 7 of them will go and then one will be stuck, you just drag him across, and it's really good. Obviously the more Kirbys you've got, the more powerful you are, so if you're fighting an end of level boss and you've only got 2 Kirbys, it takes a little bit longer than if you've got 10 all munching down on him. You don't have lives. The more Kirbys you've got, the more chance you've got of getting through to the end of the level, because if one of the Kirbys gets hit, he turns blue. If he then gets hit again, he will die and float up the screen. You can grab him and bring him back down, and then you can use him again. If all of your Kirbys end up dying at the end of that level, then you've got to restart it. So it's a very unique, highly addictive game, and something I didn't think I would start playing. I've always been a Kirby fan, but more of the traditional platformer style, like the original on the original Game Boy, Kirby's Dream Land. Fantastic game, but it's button based, and Kirby Mass Attack is all touch. So that's my quick look at Kirby Mass Attack. Highly recommend it, even if it's not your style of game. And then we get to the second point in the video. Now I'm looking at buying a new 3DS or a new 3DS XL, and I cannot decide whether I want big screens or small screens, or if it really makes any difference. So I thought I would try out Kirby Mass Attack on every system that I already own, which is 6 different versions of the DS. So I've got the original DS, the DS Lite, DSi, Dsi XL, a 3DS and a new 2DS XL, just to see, firstly, if there is any difference in gameplay, because each console's got slightly different hardware, maybe different screen qualities. Some of them have got bigger screens than others, and I wanted to see if it made a lot of difference. I started playing Kirby Mass Attack on this Dsi LL, which is Japanese XL. So what would it be like going down to a smaller screen? Well, let's find out. So this is my original DS. I've got a pink model, and I've played Kirby on it for a little while. Now, I'm no snob to screen size. I've grown up using the smaller DS's, but playing Kirby Mass Attack, obviously coming from a larger screen down to a smaller one, I did notice a few things. Now, with the original DS, I felt that the screen feels a little cramped inside such a big casing. I don't know whether it's just the design of it, but it did feel a little cramped. In terms of playing the console, it's a very comfortable console to hold, and because you're not playing it with buttons, you tend to hold it in one corner and use the stylus for playing the game itself, and it's very comfortable to hold. It really is a nice console to to hold in your hand. The screen was pretty responsive because it's smaller than the XL. The pixel quality is better. I'm quite impressed with it. Playing it on an original DS is a good experience. Then we move on to the DS Lite, which for playing regular games I prefer the DS Lite over the original DS. It's lighter, obviously the battery is a lot better. The screens are massively improved, the brightness and the clarity of them is superb. But for playing a touch-based game where you basically hold the console in your hand, I did find that it was just a little bit smaller, a little bit cramped. I felt it was more comfortable playing on the original DS, but I feel that the screens and the whole placement of the console is easier to use on the DS Lite. I felt the screen on the original DS was very cramped and hidden inside the console itself, where it's far more open on the DS Lite. And obviously battery life is way better. And while the original DS played perfectly, I felt that the DS Lite screen was a bit more responsive, and you obviously got the additional brightness settings which you don't get on the original DS. And then we move on to the DSi. So this is my blue DSi here, and it's very bright. The screens are fantastic to see. I have a feeling that the screen on the DSi is slightly larger than the DS Lite and the original DS. I hadn't really noticed that before, but I think they may be slightly bigger. I could be wrong, or maybe it's just the way that the casing looks and it makes the screen look nicer. Once again, nice bright screens, very easy to see, very responsive to touch, and when you're playing a game that is heavily touch based, you need that, especially when you're sort of flicking and you've got to move things out of the way quickly. So on that aspect, it's fantastic. I felt it a little awkward to hold. The texture of this DSi it's not sort of a smooth plastic, it's almost textured, and it just feels a little weird. It feels very slippery. And when you're holding a console for quite some time, I felt that I had to reposition my hand to play it. But in terms of gameplay, it's fantastic, just as good as the DS Lite. And if it's got slightly bigger screens, then that could be a bonus. I think I'd prefer the DS Lite over the DSi for playing games that require you to hold the console. I'm not sure if the other DSi's or all the DSi's came with this weird slippery texture. If it didn't, then you might find it easy to hold, but this one in particular, it's really shiny, really slippery, and you don't get that nice sort of grip feel that you get from a DS Lite. So that's Kirby Mass Attack on a DSi, and then we move on to the Dsi XL, which is the console I first played Kirby Mass Attack on, and oh boy, what a great experience. Now I'm playing it on my Dsi LL, which is just a Japanese Dsi XL, exactly the same, and in every way this is a much better console to play on. It's designed for people with bigger hands, so it makes it easier to grip, and you can just very easily, very comfortably hold it. And obviously you've got the massive screens. Now, yes, you lose some resolution. It's a common complaint. They take the screens from the older DS's and just make them bigger, but the resolution is the same, so they just stretch the pixels. And there are some people out there that complain and say, oh, it's too pixelated. It's a DS. It's perfectly viewable. You don't really notice it while you're playing, and the larger screens do make it great to play. The screens are large, they're bright, they're ultra responsive. If you've got a Dsi XL, then they are dual IPS screens, which are fantastic for playing games on, and I think it's absolutely superb. I recommend the Dsi XL for any DS games. One, for battery life, B, for the fantastic screens, and the extra size and the extra weight just makes it easier to play, especially when you're playing a touchscreen game. It's a lovely big touchscreen for you to play on. And then we move on to the original 3DS, and as a console, I love it. I love the build quality. It's thick and chunky and really easy to hold, great for playing games on, and if you're playing a touch-based game, I think it's really nice to hold, very comfortable. Obviously, going back to smaller screens, and being a 3DS, it does have a wider top screen, but when you're playing DS games, they default to what you would see on regular DS's. And as you can probably see, it's a highly reflective cover on the outside of this. It doesn't really affect playing, but it could do if you were in the wrong light. In terms of the touchscreen, I didn't find that the 3DS touchscreen was as responsive as the DSi or Dsi XL or even the DS Lite. One point to make out is I have replaced the touchscreen in this, so perhaps it's not a genuine Nintendo part. It's more than playable, but I did find myself flicking a couple of times and it didn't pick up. In all fairness, that's the only game that I've noticed it on, and I've used this 3DS to death. It was the console that resurged my interest in the DS range. And in terms of Kirby Mass Attack, nice bright screens. Yes, they are smaller. A fantastic console to play on. The poorer battery life in a 3DS, even when you're playing DS games, is a little bit of a disadvantage. You're not going to beat the battery life of a DS Lite or a Dsi XL, but it's still more than capable of coping for hours on end. And then we come to the final console. This is my new 2DS XL, the most powerful console and the console with the biggest screens, although once again you're playing a DS game on a 3DS, new 2DS, it only takes advantage of the centre of the screen. And once again, bright screens, fantastic picture quality. It's a bigger screen, so yes, it's going to be slightly more pixelated. It's a complaint that I don't uphold. Obviously, technically, yes, it is pixelated, but it's a DS and you don't really notice it anyway. In terms of playing Kirby Mass Attack on this, I've always found that it's not the most comfortable to play any game on. It just gives you hand cramp after a little while, and if you're constantly holding a console like this to play a touch-based game, then it's not the best console in terms of comfort. But for playing Kirby Mass Attack, the lovely big bright screen is superb. It goes along with the Dsi XL, big screen, lovely huge screen real estate to see, and because of the way that the new 2DS XL is designed, I really like it. I like the fact that it's quite wide open. I don't feel that the screen is cramped in there, and playing Kirby Mass Attack on a new 2DS XL is a good experience, except for the fact that it makes your hand ache after a while. A common complaint, which apparently is deliberate, is that the screen does tend to wobble, so if you're holding it you do tend to knock it sometimes. I'm nitpicking here. So the whole aim of this exercise was for me to see how a DS game plays on a variety of different consoles, and then to decide whether I liked the massive screens or just the average size screen, because I am looking at buying either a new 3DS or a new 3DS XL. I was hoping that this little experiment would actually come and answer my question, but I can't actually decide. Yeah, I loved playing it on the Dsi XL. Big chunky console, easy to hold, brilliant bright screens, but I do also like playing it on the DSi itself, apart from the glossy finish, and I do probably think the DS Lite is an absolutely great candidate. I would discount the 3DS for its short battery life, but for comfort it is great. The worst one out of it, I suppose, is the original DS. Poor screen quality, or poor screen brightness should I say, and just that overall cramped screen that's sort of buried in this huge plastic shell. So I haven't been able to answer the question itself. New 3DS or new 3DS XL? I think if a new 3DS XL came up at a reasonable price, I would go for it purely because of the big screen. But if a new 3DS came up, the non-XL version, then I would probably pick it up and I would be happy with it, I think. But I do like my large screens. So no, I haven't really fully been able to answer the question. A lot of my issue comes down to availability and price, and the new 3DS XL really does still hold its price, with the new 3DS trailing. You can pick them up a little bit cheaper. So it does come down to personal preference. Obviously the smaller consoles are more pocketable, so carrying a new 3DS XL around with you is going to be a bit of a chunk compared to carrying a new 3DS. I'm definitely going to pick one over the other. In all honesty, I don't think it matters. It's not down to, oh, I have to have the bigger screens because the smaller ones aren't good enough. It is more down to cost and whether I can get one or not, because they're becoming a little bit harder to get at decent prices. So I've kind of answered the question. I don't actually think there's a preference over the two. The new 3DS has interchangeable faceplates, which is always a a nice bonus for customization, whereas the new 3DS XL has got large screens. That's the only two either side of the two consoles. The new 3DS has slightly bigger screens. I think they're 1.2 times larger than the original 3DS, so they're not as small as the original 3DS or the DS Lite. That's my conclusions. To wrap up this video, that is Kirby Mass Attack, a game I am absolutely obsessed with. It's addictive and cute and fun to play. That is my roundup of playing that game on different systems to give you a view of what they look like, the pros and cons of each different console, and my summary of whether I will go for a new 3DS or a new 3DS XL. I hope you liked this video, and let me know what you think. Have you played Kirby Mass Attack? Did you think it was good? Have you not seen it before? Did you think it was just a regular Kirby platformer? And let me know what you think about my conclusions on the different consoles and playing games on them. And if you've got a new 3DS or a new 3DS XL, or if you've got a new 2DS XL, which one do you prefer? Do you like the bigger screens, or does it not bother you? Let me know, drop a comment, link, like, subscribe, enjoy.